Venugopal is the VP of Sales at Freestyle Plus. He is a seasoned improviser, comedian, and host based in the Bay Area with a background in software development, nonprofit fundraising, tech sales, improv, and performance. Not in that order, but sort of in that order. He has hosted events and performed shows around the world with Speechless, American Immigrants, and Freestyle Plus. He lives in San Francisco with his wife, 2 kids, and a dog, where he improvises being a good parent and a good partner every day with varying degrees of success. I think we can all empathize with that. I met Vivek recently at an event and we totally clicked, and I sat through his session and it was so much fun. I know this episode is going to be so cool. Vivek, welcome to Prospecting on Purpose.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And way to set the bar relatively high. Now we have to make this a fun episode.
Oh yeah, we will. It's Friday afternoon. Like we
Yeah.
got no other option. Well, just kick us off to like set the mood. I don't always ask icebreaker questions of my guests, but I knew that as a comedian and an improver, you could handle it. So you didn't know what this question was, but I'm going to ask you if you were on the if you were going to host Saturday Night Live, who
Mhm.
would you want for your co-host, and who would you have as your musical guest?
Well, I need a co-host while I'm hosting Saturday Night Live.
Yeah,
Great. So my musical guest would have to be Taylor Swift only so that my daughters could meet her.
cool.
And if I don't say that, I think like I'm contractually obligated to say Taylor Swift whenever anyone asks. And I guess for my co-host, it would have to be someone who does impressions really well because I'm really bad at impressions. In fact, I'm terrible at accent work, and so whenever I perform improv, my performing partner Anthony will purposely endow me with an accent that I have to then struggle through. And I read somewhere someone describing their accent work as always ending up on Borat really quickly, and that's really me. Any accent I do, I end up sounding like Borat in the end. So I would say someone like, oh my God, it would a Bill Hader.
Oh,
I
that's a good
would
one.
love a Bill Hader as a co-host. So that's my co-host, that's my musical guest, and the only impression I can do, and it doesn't involve talking, is I can play Steve Harvey. And so I can shave my beard, just have the mustache. I've got the bald head already, and I look good in a three-piece suit. So there you go.
Can
I'll
you
I'll do Family Feud.
can you give us a Steve Harvey impression?
No, I can't. Literally cannot do the impression. I can look like him, and that's all. That's the point.
All
I'm
right.
so bad
All
at
right. Well,
impressions.
very nice. Very okay, well, that was a good answer. I appreciated that. Thank you. So let's get into a little bit about your background and then Freestyle Plus and like how those two things came together.
Yeah, so my background, as you mentioned in the bio, I have a varied background. I was born, I'm gonna go all the way back. I was born in Zambia in Africa. I lived there till I was 11. I moved to India and I finished high school in India, and then I made the natural transition to Iowa for college, right? Look, I'm not going to tell the whole story because it's been told in various forms thousands of times on movies and podcasts, but we've all heard the story about moving from India to Iowa. But I was a computer science major out of college. Right out of school, I had a software developer job. I worked in software development for almost 5 years, my first 5 years of my career. And then I moved into nonprofit fundraising. And then I moved into nonprofit fundraising because I really wanted to work on something that had an impact, right? And so I moved into that world. And what drew me to nonprofit fundraising was really the idea that I was going to be working with people. I did not enjoy being a software developer because I was essentially just working with code and computers. And I realized at one point I was talking to someone and I said, do you enjoy being a programmer? And he said, yeah, I just love that feeling you get when you solve a problem that you've been working for a week to solve. And I said, I think you're defining pleasure as the absence of pain,
Mm.
right? If you bang your head against a wall for long enough, you will break through and you'll see the view and you'll say, wow, what a beautiful view. And my head doesn't hurt anymore. But I was like, I don't want to do that. So I moved into the nonprofit fundraising world. And for anyone who has done any nonprofit fundraising, you know that that is essentially sales. Nonprofit fundraising is essentially sales, except you're not usually selling a physical thing. You're selling warm, fuzzy feelings, you know? And I really took to it. I loved the work I was doing. I worked for a hospital foundation in Chicago that brought me to San Francisco, where I worked for an international nonprofit that works in both Zambia and in India, doing
Cool.
literacy and girls' education work. So that was a true calling for me. Worked there for a little while, and then I was in San Francisco, and I was surrounded by tech, and I was like, let me see if I can actually translate my sales skills and fundraising to the tech world. And what I learned was if you can sell nothing, you can certainly sell something, you know? So I moved into, I worked for a small startup. We got acquired by LinkedIn at one point, and then I spent a few years as an enterprise sales rep at LinkedIn. And during that time, met a couple of folks who were running a comedy show called Speechless Live. And Speechless Live is a show where we get comedians and improvisers to get up on stage and give a fully improvised talk using slides they've never seen before.
Oh,
Yeah, it's most people's living nightmare, and it's really funny to watch. So
who would be in the audience? Would it be like a comedy show or was it
it's a
in
comedy, yeah, a comedy show. So just a comedy audience who would come to watch, and the performer gets up on stage and spins a wheel, and the wheel lands on a specific topic, like or a specific style of speaking, I should say, like TED Talk, startup pitch,
cool?
eulogy, sermon, like a whole wedding proposal, any number of options. And then the audience would give a suggestion for the topic of the talk. So you might get to eulogy, and the host would say, who is a fictional character that this person is eulogizing? And someone said, The Little Mermaid. Great, you're giving a eulogy for The Little Mermaid. And then you just have to start talking and click through the slides as if you prepared the slides, as if you know exactly what's coming up next. So I did this show and loved it, and was pretty good at it. And I started to do the show more often. And what I realized as I was doing the show was that all those sales calls that I was doing with my clients as an enterprise sales rep were essentially these kind of mini improv shows, right? Because if you've ever been to an improv show, you know that the show itself has a structure, but it's all informed by the gets from the audience. So you would ask the audience, give us a location, give us a fruit, give us an animal, whatever, and you'd use all those to create that story. As a sales rep, what I found was that the most successful conversations I was having with people were ones where I spent the first 10 minutes of the conversation not ever looking at my slides, not ever talking about the company, but asking them questions. And those questions could be personal questions. It could be questions about the work. It could be questions about their company. But the most successful pitches were the ones where I was able to integrate the answers they had given me in that moment into the pitch that I was giving. And as I started to recognize that, I started to really kind of immerse myself in improv a lot more. I started taking classes. I went through the way that improv works is very much it's like Scientology. You just have to you buy into all the different classes until you get to a point where you have mastered something. But I went through an improv school here in San Francisco, loved it, and started to perform on the Speechless stage a lot. And the guys who had started Speechless were Anthony Veneziali and Sammy Wiegand. And they took me out to lunch one day, and they said, we've got kind of this B2B business that we're trying to build out. You have all this experience in sales, and you have this really cushy tech job where you don't do a lot of work and you get paid a lot of money. How would you like to do the opposite? And I said, yes, sign me up. And that's how I came into Speechless, which now has become Freestyle Plus. But there is we can talk at length about this, but there is a very clear Venn diagram that shows how the skills that you need in order to be good at improv are exactly the same kind of skills that you need to be a great salesperson and to have those conversations and to really build authentic connections with people. Which is why when I heard your talk at the Forbes Travel Guide Summit, I was so excited because I was like, yes, this is exactly what we are talking about.
Well, it's funny because I feel like I have a lot of like light bulbs firing on my side too. When you're sharing, at the beginning of a call or the beginning of a presentation, you're getting the gets from your
Yeah.
prospects versus an audience. I've never made that like lineation before, but it makes so much sense. And the listeners of the show know like we sell to business models. So instead of just going in with your pitch, you have to engage and understand who are the roles, what project are you working on, what are your circumstances and the problem you're trying to solve. But I've never thought about it in like the improv sense, and I think that might make it a lot lighter for people to
Yeah.
go into it. So I can't wait to dive into this with you.
Absolutely. And I've been in sales for a while now, but I just remember the time when young SDRs were being trained and saying, Hey, discovery questions. Everyone needs to ask discovery questions. And here and marketing would give you all the discovery questions. Here are the questions you need to ask in order to vet, and then you can score the lead and all of that fun stuff. And I've been in so many meetings where you would see the person asking the questions and they would say, so what are your greatest, and look down their notes, challenges?
Pain.
What, yeah, what are your greatest pain points? And they would just ask all these questions. And whatever answer was given, they would say, great, here's the presentation I put together yesterday. And
Or
has nothing
right,
to do with anything
here's
you
the
just said.
next question. Don't acknowledge or recognize what's on the list. Oh man.
Yeah. And so for me, and when we run kind of any sort of sales training or when I'm talking to salespeople, I say it's as important to ask them personal questions as it is to ask them those discovery questions, because then you can start to actually build that connection early on and not do it in an inauthentic way. Right? Because if you ask, sometimes I've seen again people trying to create that quote unquote authentic connection, and they say, "What did you do this weekend?" And
Mm.
the prospect goes, "Why are you asking? I don't know. I don't know you."
It's like what?
Yeah, and they're like, kid's birthday party," and they're like, "Okay," and then it never gets brought up. But if they say kid's birthday party, and halfway through your pitch you say something about how everything is complete chaos, not unlike a 4-year-old's birthday party after cake's been served, if you can do that, if you can build that connection, and if you can go into a meeting with a mindset of not I'm going to try and create this relationship, but you go in the mindset of I'm going to have a conversation with someone, and our natural conversation skills allow us to draw on things that we have heard, do callbacks, all of those different things. You don't have to go to school to study that. You can just draw on your own conversational skills, but you need to be in that authentic mindset when you go in there. And when you do that, that all happens much more seamlessly.
That's awesome. So then how can you walk through like when I guess how do people hire you? How do companies hire you? And then what happens next?
Yeah, so I should say we're a super unique company in that there are a lot of companies that are what are called applied improv companies, right? So companies that have created these trainings and these workshops using improv and bringing them into the workplace. What we did a couple of years ago was that Speechless as a company, we joined forces with an entity called Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, which was also created by some of the folks who created Speechless. So Freestyle Love Supreme is an improvised hip hop Broadway show that was created by Anthony Veneziali, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Tommy Kail, a whole bunch of folks who went on to create Hamilton and do all this fun stuff on Broadway. And I mean, they created this group 20 years ago almost. And there's a great documentary on Hulu about it called We Are Freestyle Love Supreme.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Okay. I'll link it in
and
the show notes or yeah, yeah.
Great, perfect. Yeah. And about a few years ago, they actually resurrected the show, and they had a couple of runs on Broadway, pre and post pandemic, and then they had a national tour. And as part of that whole process, they created the academy where they were training people on things like beatboxing and freestyle rapping and all of that fun stuff. We joined forces with them a couple of years ago and created Freestyle Plus to bring in kind of the B2B sales trainings and things we were doing from the Speechless side, along with that entertainment and wow factor that comes in with the Freestyle of Supreme folk. And so Freestyle Plus now exists in this really interesting space where we are so many different things to different people. When event organizers reach out to us, it's because they want that entertainment, that star power coming in and delivering entertainment that also educates.
Mhm.
From when L&D managers and HR directors reach out to us, it's because they want us to bring in some of our trainings and our workshops, and then we've created these really cool services that combine the two, right? Where you get entertained and you get educated. You saw a little glimpse of that with that session that we did at Forbes Travel Guide. But typically we show up then to our engagements, and we've got these Tony Award-winning Broadway performers and me delivering our workshops. But it is so it kind of runs the gamut. We also make videos, typically comedic videos. Everything that we do, though, comes from a place of improv thinking and mental fitness. So we have over the years understood that one, the word improv strikes fear into everyone's heart.
That's one of my questions I would have for you. Are people like super anxious and nervous to participate?
Yes, very much so. In fact, a lot of times when we will send a blurb that they are going to send out to their team to say, hey, this is the session we're going to do, we don't use the word improv.
Oh,
Because when people see the word improv, they suddenly have a really important client call that's at exactly the same time, and they,
sick.
yeah, and so and I'm very clear when we talk to our prospects and our clients. I say we don't teach improv classes. What we do is we run sessions on improv thinking, which is to say, how can we help you become really great at the work you are doing using the skills that performers and improvisers and musicians use. So we've taken those skills and those methods and adapted them to the professional environment. And you're not going to come out of a session that we run saying, okay, I'm ready to be on Whose Line Is It Anyway or audition for SNL. I mean, you might, but it's not probably because of our session. But what you are coming away with is here are 2 or 3 things that I can use immediately to help me get into a mindset that allows me to be truly present, authentic, raises my confidence, allows me to build and collaborate more effectively, and listen effectively, deeply listen to people. And those are all skills that are so important for salespeople. We do trainings for engineers, sales teams, leaders, all sorts of different groups, D&I workshops, all those kinds of things. But if you think about the skills that you need in order to be a truly great performer, and you kind of break them down into like the core tenets of what it takes to truly be a good performer, you'll see that all of them relate to all these different things. So depending on the group that we work with and the outcomes they're looking for, we'll create these curriculums and deliver sessions that last anywhere from an hour to, full day or multi-day sessions that we work with bigger teams on.
Cool. Well, it's funny because when you're talking, I did drama in high school, like I always enjoyed it, but
Mhm.
a lot of it's performing and memorizing lines and just being comfortable in your own skin as you're in front of other people. And when you think about presenting to prospects or in a sales presentation, you're presenting. Hopefully, you're not reading your notes, but I
Right.
could see this applied to any type of role. Like you just mentioned engineering. It's like engineers need to present to senior leadership. They like L&D leaders, project managers, product
Right.
managers. So I could see how it applies to anyone at the company. And from the event standpoint, like one of the things I really got out of our session, so I attended your session,
Right.
and I was, partnered with people doing the exercises, and I have business coming out of those partnerships. And it's funny because I didn't know who the other person was. They didn't know who I was. We go through this uncomfortable, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was pretty fun, but like it was a unique way to start a relationship with someone. But
Yeah.
afterwards, it felt so much more like close, fun, compatible. Like it was just really an interesting, like I felt like I developed business out of it too. So I would add that to your list. Like,
No, completely. Yeah. And it's all because we got you to a state of play, right?
mm,
And play is our big thing that we're trying to get across. What we are in our ideal world, everyone would have at least 20 minutes of play a day. That's
mm,
our goal,
mm,
right? Every person in the world, 20 minutes of play a day. Anyone under the age of 18, maybe even like call it 25, find ways to play every day, right? And you have these things. But as we grow up, we have been taught to stop playing. We've said, hey, when you come into work, serious face. This is you're an adult now. Like be an adult and be a corporate person or whatever. And so we've stopped playing. Now it's changed a little bit with things like Wordle and connections and things like that, right? Where people are now finding ways to be like, oh, I need to do something that isn't being on social media that allows me to take a break. There's a lot of science and study that shows that play not only helps keep your mind agile and is allows you, and we can talk about the science, allows you to create these new neural pathways that you know give you permission to take little risks here and there and do all those things. But also, it's the fastest way to establish trust and build connections with people. In fact, improv as we know today, um, was created by a woman named Viola Spolin. She's lived in Chicago, worked at an organization called the Hull House in Chicago that worked with immigrant families and immigrant children specifically. And she developed improv as we know today, these games and these exercises, as a way for immigrant children to start to build trust and connection with the community and the other kids around, because she was like, if everyone is equally bad at something, then it breaks down these these perceived hierarchies that you have. And so for your to your point, Sarah, when you started having conversations with someone, if you go in there as, hey, I'm Sarah, I'm trying to sell something to you,
Right.
there's already like a power imbalance.
Yeah.
If you go in there and say, hey, we're gonna, I guess, create this story together that we're gonna pretend we went on a trip together. This is so weird. Both of you are quote unquote equally bad at it and also equally good at it. Now you're on a even playing field. And then because of what's happening in your brain when you start to get into that flow state, you are being authentic. And
Yeah.
that authenticity builds that human connection so much faster than anything else could, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
hugged my people at the end of our like 2 minute
right.
thing,
Yeah.
and I also you had made something that was you made a point that was really interesting about being present because
Mhm.
as I was so my session was directly after yours and I had some nerves going, right? But as I'm partnering and doing my exercises, I couldn't even think about my session because I was so focused on what was happening. And I think that from a present standpoint and an active listening standpoint, it was really nice to kind of like dump everything that was rolling around in my brain just off and then just be focused on being with my partner. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And the flow state, we call it flow state. Athletes call it getting in the zone.
Mhm,
That allows you to fully immerse yourself in the activity you're doing
mhm,
and lose track of time, forget about all the things that are worrying you. I read recently that the phrase, this is a little bit of a tangent, but the phrase sleep on it
mhm,
is actually kind of rooted in science. It's not just a way of kind of kicking the can down the road of making a decision, but actually, when you're asleep, your brain is making all these neural connections as you're sleeping. And so in the morning, when you wake up and think about this thing that was stressing you out the night before or a problem you couldn't solve, you're more likely to be able to solve it or figure out the solution because you've allowed your brain to kind of do its work. When you get into the flow state, something similar happens,
mm,
right? Where you are like, okay, I'm engaged with this part of my brain now. And yes, things are happening in the background, but I don't need to think about them. And when I come back out of it, oh wow, everything's better, right? So when you're stressed out about a talk or something like that, and you're able to play a game with someone, and then you come back, either you're a little less stressed out, or the thing that was stressing you out has kind of solved itself in your head, right? There are so many different ways that it can enhance whatever it is that you're trying to do or trying to get to. But there's a lot of science here, and we've actually been working at Freestyle Plus for the better part of a decade with a neuroscientist out of UCSF here in San Francisco. He runs a lab at UCSF, and he has been studying the effects of flow state on your brain
mm.
for a long time now. He has a great TED talk, which we can link in the show notes as well. And the way that he did the first part of his experiment was he put jazz musicians and freestyle rappers into fMRI machines. So functional magnetic resonance imaging machines. His name is Dr. Charles Lim. And he is a great jazz musician in his own right, but he wanted to understand what's actually happening in your brain when you're improvising, because jazz music is all about improvising, right? That's you have a tune and then you're kind of going crazy and you're coming back to the main melody and doing all that stuff. And so he actually had to create a keyboard that had no magnetic components in it, an earpiece and a microphone that had no magnetic components in it, so that people could lie down, and there's these great images of people lying down with like a keyboard on their lap. And he studied their brains. And then, so the second part of the experiment he actually did with a bunch of us at Freestyle Plus, where he studied our brains when we were, just doing improv exercises and improvising. And he found that there are kind of two parts of your brain that can get activated when you communicate. And one's called the medial prefrontal cortex, the other is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And, I'm not a neuroscientist, but the very basic kind of breakdown of it is that your medial prefrontal cortex houses authenticity, creativity, memories, background, all of that fun stuff. And your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex holds your judging voice, for lack of a better phrase, right? It is that voice that says, hey, don't ask that question. People will think you look dumb. Don't wear that shirt. People will think you look stupid, right? It's a survival voice. It's the voice that says, don't walk in oncoming traffic because that's a bad idea, right? But oftentimes it is the voice that holds us back from taking maybe a little bit of a creative risk, or even again asking that question in a meeting because you don't want to look dumb because you feel that judgment.
Yeah.
And so what Dr. Lim found is that when you get into your flow state, when you play Remember When with a partner, and that's all you're thinking about, when you get there, two things happen simultaneously. One is your medial prefrontal cortex gets amplified. So more oxygenated hemoglobin flows to that part of your brain. So more blood comes to your medial prefrontal cortex. At the same time, that judging voice gets muted. Both of those, the judging voice and your medial prefrontal cortex, can exist at the same volume. So when one goes up, the other one goes down. So what does that mean? It means when you get into that state, you are more likely to be less self-judgmental. You're more likely to care a little bit less about how you might be perceived if you do this, and you get into that analytical thinking part of it. All of that gets muted and you get to be more yourself. You allow yourself to be authentic. And that's what we are trying to get across, and that's what play can do. 20 minutes of play a day can help you like do that much more effectively. If you are able to do an exercise like one of the exercises we did before you go into a difficult call with a manager or with a client, you have no idea what to expect. I always tell people, how many times have you joined a sales call and it has gone exactly as you thought it would?
Mhm.
And it's 0%, right? You're like, I'm going to say this and they're going to say that, and then I'm going to say this and they're going to say that, and all my slides are in perfect order. That never happens. So
Yeah.
if you can get into that flow state mindset and then go into the call, you have this part of your brain that is now you have access to. So when a client asks you a question, you go, oh, you know what? I don't have that on my slide deck, but I do know I worked with on that same problem with another client last year, and this is how they were able to solve it, right? If you memorize your talk and you go in and you're like, I know exactly what I'm going to talk about, and then they say, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? And you're like, that's not, I don't have a slide for that. Oh God, oh God. And I'm crash and burn. Yeah. So that's the kind of science behind the work.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to say very cool to learn about the origin story of improv. I did not know that. And I think that that makes it, I think less silly, I don't want to say it that
Yeah.
way, but it makes it
What?
I think, a little more serious, in a positive way.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah, absolutely. And by the way, silliness, we love the silliness. Obviously, like we want people to give themselves permission to be silly. But you're absolutely right. You know, when people think of improv now, they think of sketch comedy. Most people's first experience with improv is not a positive one. Most
yeah.
people's first experience with improv is either my friend made me pay $10 and go sit in a black box theater and it was terrible, or I got called up on stage and like I had to like pretend to be a dog and I hated it, right? So they have these like visceral reactions to it. And um and and so what we are trying to get across is any conversation you have is improv, right? You are improvising every single moment of your life. And there are some very important and serious implications in what you can do with applied improv, or applications I should say, for applied improv. In fact, it's one of the reasons we're partnering very closely with AARP and the Age Tech Collaborative, because improv has shown to be a great way for you to be able to, again, keep your mind flexible, slow down the effects of aging on the brain, slow down the effects of early onset Alzheimer's, those kinds of things, right? So we have been working closely with them. In fact, we did a big activation with them at CES this year, and it was really interesting just to see how it fits into all the other tech that's being developed around aging and what you can do. So yes, very serious applications for a silly thing that sometimes is thought of as a silly thing.
Like my grandma had dementia, and they say, with dementia patients and Alzheimer's patients, you just kind of have to roll with whatever they say. And so that's how we handled some of the things that, you're repeating yourself 5 times a day, 5 times an hour. It just kind of got easier to just roll with it. And she enjoyed that more too. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate you sharing that. That's super cool. I would love to dive into that more too. But before we do, I want to talk about, and that might have to just be a separate episode, because I feel like
Yeah,
as we're
exactly.
talking, I'm like, oh my God, I have so many things I want to say. Like I love the idea of going into a meeting without the buyer seller vibe, more of just, hey, we're here to have a conversation. We have a common goal, hopefully, and let's just walk through this together more connected, more authentically, versus my mission is to get you to buy for me today. Like not
Yeah, yeah.
present.
No, absolutely. I always talk about it as your goal at the end of your meeting with your client should be to be on the same side of the table as them.
Yeah.
You'll start on the other side of the table, but your goal is to become that trusted advisor,
Yeah.
right? And that might mean that it's a longer sale. And that's okay because it'll be a much more impactful and effective sale, both for you and for your client, if you are able to be on the same side of the table and be that trusted advisor. I always there's one story that I always think about. I mentioned I used to work at LinkedIn, and I remember I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I was at his desk, and his phone rang, and he's like, "Oh, hold on, this is my client," and he answered the call and talked to the client, and he was like, "Yeah, I've heard great things about them. Yeah, I think you should." And he hung up, and I said, "What was that?" And he said, "Oh, he's thinking about purchasing this sales software, not a competitor of ours, just another piece of software in the marketing, in the martech kind of ecosystem." And so he called me to ask me if I'd heard about it and what my thoughts were about that company. And that's a trusted advisor,
Mhm.
someone who your client is going to call you because they trust that you know the industry well enough that you're going to give them good advice on it. That is what you every salesperson should be striving for. But you can only build that trust if you don't go in with that buyer seller mentality going in, where you're like, I'm just going to go and I'm going to like destroy, I'm going to crush this, right?
It's so funny because now that I'm a business owner, I'm on the receiving end of pitches more. And
Hmm.
it is like podcast content for days of what not to do. And a lot of it's people that do it right are the ones that get the business. But it's like, it's interesting to be on the other side of it because now I feel like I have more perspectives to offer just in general, my clients or the audience. So it's not been a bad thing. It's just been interesting.
Yeah. Did you ever read The Challenger Sale, the book The
Yeah.
Challenger Sale? There was a time, at least in the Bay Area, where that was like the sales Bible, right?
Like 10 years ago, that was
About
required
10 years ago,
reading for the company I was at.
everyone had to read the Challenger Sale, and then everyone had to, like, present in that mode and everything. I found the effects of it to be very similar to what happened with, oh gosh, what was that other book? The Candid, Radical Candor.
Mhm.
Right, Radical Candor is a great and amazing book and an amazing concept of, like, hey, let's not beat around the bush, let's just be truthful, honest, all these things. A lot of people in the business world took that to mean, hey, it's okay for me to just be a terrible person to the people I work with.
Okay, I was like, where is he going with the Challenger sale? Because it didn't really resonate with my style, and I didn't like it.
So that was Radical Candor, and with the Challenger Sale, the same thing happened, right? Because the Challenger Sale, for folks who haven't read it, essentially a couple of researchers started to research different types of salespeople, and they happened to start their research in 2007, and then in 2008 the big recession hit, so they were able to track how people did during a recession, and they broke it down to, like, I think three main personas, right? You had the lone wolf, who's the salesperson who goes from company to company with their Rolodex and just has their clients and they just sell and move on. You had the relationship builder, which everyone knows what that is. And then you had the challenger. And the challenger was the person who was willing to challenge the client and ask them the hard question. And and during the recession, they thought, oh, the relationship builder is going to do the best. But what they found was that the challenger salespeople did better. And so that's the best way to sell. And a lot of people that I work with took that to mean, hey, it's okay for me to tell the client that they are not smart. It's
Mhm.
okay for me to just, I'm not going to use salty language here, Sarah, so that, the podcast can stay in the top
Clean.
2% of.
We're clean show.
Yeah, yeah, we're a clean show. So, they just were like, oh, it's okay for me to be not a nice person to my
Table.
clients.
Yeah.
And it was brutal because, as you can tell, I'm a relationship builder, right? I would rather have a great relationship with a client that potentially will bear fruit down the line than to close a quick, cheap, and easy sale. And so, that for me was like a very eye-opening experience, because people were like, nope, the right way to do it is to just treat your clients like they're kindergartners who don't know what they're doing, and I know best. And in fact, what happens then over 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, if you don't have that relationship built, you're never going to get another sale. If you do have the relationship built, not only are you going to probably sell to that client, but they are going to take you with them when they go. And that is what we found.
Absolutely. I mean, I have one person I can think of, and she moved companies a couple of times. And every time it was like, Sarah, you're the brand standard for, XYZ national chain.
Right.
You're the brand standard for this. Like it was the gift that kept giving. And it was just because I spent the time at the beginning building the relationship. And that's really what this show's about too. Like it's very relationship heavy. And I liked what you said about, before you go into a big presentation, before you go into a client meeting, to like kind of get loose and get in flow state.
Yeah.
So can we share some examples? Can we get in some examples of like what does that look like if people want to
Sure,
practice?
sure. So we have a whole host of exercises, and something I tell people a lot is if you go backstage to a Broadway show about an hour before showtime, you'll see 20 different actors doing 20 different warm-up exercises. So the key is not, oh, everyone has to do this warm-up exercise. The
Okay.
key is everyone has to figure out which ones resonate with them the most and which one helps them get into that flow state as fast as possible, right? And so and then the second thing that we talk about is it's not important to just um, do a physical warm-up exercise or a mental warm-up exercise. You really want to do something that can connect your mind and your body and align them. You know, I talk about it like people who are musicians. You know, Yo-Yo Ma is the greatest cellist in the world. And if Yo-Yo Ma goes out on stage and puts on a piece of music that was written 300 years ago, perfect music that's already been written, and he's been, you know, playing the cello for 50, 60 years, whatever it is, he is completely adept at it. But if one string of his four strings are out of tune, it's going to sound a little bit off to the
Mm.
audience. And he can do a lot of work. He's Yo-Yo Ma, so he can do the work to make it sound okay, but it means that he has to work extra hard. If you go into a presentation or a client call and either your mind isn't warmed up or your body isn't warmed up and you're not fully aligned, it's going to sound a little bit off. It doesn't matter how good your product is. It doesn't matter how good of a salesperson you are. If you are not warmed up and in that right headspace, it's going to sound a little off, and you could probably power through it, but it takes a lot more work, right?
Yeah,
So
like you're tuning your instrument before you go into the room.
exactly. So we have a whole host of exercises to tune all the different parts of our instrument, but let's do one that can be kind of fun for you. Do
Okay.
you want to do one right now, right?
Don't tell me.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I'm
let's do one that
tell me the
doesn't.
hard ones. I don't care. We'll do it.
Or well, do you want to learn how to beatbox, Sarah?
Sure.
You
Let's
want
do
to learn
that.
how to beatbox? And
Yeah.
then I'll talk, and then I'll actually talk about why beatboxing and why beats specifically, and the kind of hip hop of it all with the work we do. But okay, so we're gonna learn how to beatbox, and the way we're gonna do it is we're just gonna. There's two words that you need to know in order to beatbox, and the first word is the word boot, right? Like these boots are made for walking.
Okay.
So go ahead and say the word boots.
Boots.
Great, perfect. Now say it again, and this time I want you to really kind of like make that be a plosive, right? So, you know, where you don't have to worry about spitting on me because we
Okay.
are separated by thousands of miles and computer screens. So go ahead and say boot. Yeah, like really, like you want to make those lips kind of tight and go boots
Boots.
again.
Boots.
Yeah, good, 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 good. So now we're going to do a quick version of this, but we're going to take away the two O's. So we're going to take away the ooh sound. So you'll just go poo, ts, ts. Try that.
Boots.
Yeah, and like and just make it do that.
At the end or the beginning?
The B, the
Boots.
yeah. So you're going to go ts, ts.
Boots. Boots.
Great, 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 great. Okay, so that's one word. The next word is the word cuts. So go
Cut.
ahead and say that.
Cuts.
Yeah. So now when you do it, I want you to emphasize that first C, and I want you to think about your mouth like it's a cave, okay? And like there's the top of your mouth is the top of the cave where like that like big stalactite, right?
Okay.
Stalactite, that's what hangs from the top.
Yeah.
Right. So stalactite is right up there. And so you're gonna like really hit that part. And it's almost you're gonna feel like it's ricocheting off the top of your palate and down. So it's gonna go cuts.
Cuts.
Yeah, cuts.
Cuts.
Okay, now again, you're going to take off that middle syllable. So it's just going to go, tss.
Cuts. Cuts.
Yeah, again.
It's hard to
Yeah.
draw. Cuts.
Tss. Great. So now you're going to go, you're going to put it all together and you're going to go and say it after me. You're going to go, tss, tss. Again. Tss, 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 tss. And now you can start to add to it. You can go, tss, tss.
Okay. I feel like I should do just the little one and then you rap.
No, so but here's but what we're doing here, you can, you can start to like take those four sounds and like put them in different order, and you can go
Cool.
right, and you can like start to like do that, and then you can get even more, and you can start to float tones. You can be like right, and you get to do all that. I am by no means
I was
an
gonna say I'm not
expert
gonna do that.
beatboxer. I am not an expert beatboxer. However, there's a few reasons we do this as an exercise. First of all, it's a great vocal warm up. You are doing things with your face where you're like, oh God, I didn't think that I'd be able to do that.
Like thinking of my mouth as a cave. That
Yeah,
was tricky. And I will tell you, maybe you're gonna get to this, but I wasn't thinking about anything else. My
exactly.
brain was empty.
Yeah, you were like, I'm just, oh
Very
God,
focused.
how am I going to do this? And that's what happens when you're learning, right? When you get into that quote unquote growth mindset, you're like, okay, now all I'm going to focus on is trying to figure out what's happening here. You are doing something that your brain is like, nope, impossible. I can't do that. Right. And what happens then is, because it's kind of fun to do it, because it's silly, because it's something you've never done before, and because it's something that probably you're going to start to do a lot more now, anytime you'll hear a song, try and match the beat. Right? Yeah, there you go. And then you can start to do that, and you start to get into that little bit of a flow and a little bit of a rhythm. Because you do that, there's a part of your brain that's going to go, the last time we tried to do something crazy, it was a little bit fun.
Yeah.
So that little bit of fear that comes with trying something new is being replaced by joy. Just a tiny bit of it, just enough that maybe your brain becomes a little bit more plastic and becomes a little bit more adaptogenic, and starts to go, yes, it's okay for me to learn new things. And by the way, it's kind of fun to learn new things. And once you start to enjoy learning new things, you can start to practice it. Once you start to practice, you get better at it, right? So there's all these great benefits, these tangential benefits that come from a seemingly silly warm-up exercise, right?
Yeah, I totally see.
um
And I'm like representing the white female beatboxers of Utah.
Look, the beatboxer that we work with most frequently is, her name is Kayla Milady. Her stage name is Kaiser Rose, and she is the two-time world beatbox champion. And she is a white lady, not unlike yourself, and is unbelievable at beatboxing. Please look her up,
Okay,
watch her
yeah.
videos. She is the one of the greatest beatboxers, literally, named one of the greatest beatboxers in the world.
What's
So
her name
don't
again?
let that hold you back.
Kaiser Rose? Kaiser Rose?
Kaiser Rose.
Rose?
Um,
Oh, that's fun. Okay, okay.
Kaiser Rose, but
Yeah, okay. I mean,
Kayla Milady.
and
Yeah,
that's a limiting belief that like you just helped me overcome. I'm like,
exactly. There you go.
so what?
But just really,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
but really quickly, I want to talk about beats and the importance of beats in the work that we do, because we bring in hip hop and elements of hip hop into the workplace as well, and that is also scary to people. They're like, I don't that doesn't feel like it
Mhm.
makes sense for the work that I do. I work in manufacturing. Why should I learn how to
Right,
beatbox and
right.
do hip hop? But beats are really an important way of creating trust,
Mhm.
and really effective at creating trust quickly. There's some great studies that show that a bunch of people listening to the same beat at the same time creates trust really quickly between like adults and toddlers. And like, you can hold a toddler's hand and walk if you've been listening to the same beat for 5 minutes. There's some great science behind it, and it explains why drum circles are so effective at creating community, why marching bands exist for armies and things like that, because you're just like, okay, now we're all in sync,
Same
we're
wavelength,
on the
kind of.
same
Yeah.
wavelength. Yeah, and our
Cool.
like synapses are firing at the same frequency. So there's a lot of great benefits that come with that. So when we do a warm up like boots and cuts early on in a workshop that we're running, people are like, oh my God, that's silly and that's crazy and ha ha ha. And this is so difficult. And like, oh my God, I cringe trying to do it.
What I did at
But
work today, mom and dad.
yeah, exactly. But what happens in that room is that everyone is starting to build trust, and you're creating a space of psychological safety, because the exercises we do are putting people outside their comfort zone, and they're not going to do that if they feel judged by the people around them. Putting everyone on a level playing field, creating that psychological safety, allows people to surprise themselves and to try doing something that they have never thought they would be able to do, like beatboxing or giving a fully improvised talk using slides they've never seen before, right? So by the end of our workshops, the people who are volunteering to do things are very different than the people who had volunteered at the beginning. Those
That's
quote unquote extroverts are now being usurped by the people who are like, I'll try it, sure,
Yeah,
right?
because
And
they're on the
that's
wavelength, and it's like everyone's looking silly together, and so that I like
exactly,
the even playing field. So
yeah.
what other so now we all know how to beatbox. Thank you for that. That as I was doing as we were doing it, like afterwards, I was like, man, the podcast does take me some interesting places. That is nice about that.
That's exactly it. Like every time we do a debrief, people are like, "Yep, didn't think I'd be doing that today."
But how awesome. I loved it. So give us another one that we can like practice with our managers before we go into a pitch.
Great. So another one. So something that I do before I get up in front of any audience whatsoever is I do something called a shakeout,
Okay.
right? And we did this as an energizer at the summit that we were at. But the shakeout is essentially, and if you watch the We Are Freestyle Love Supreme movie, you'll see them do this,
Okay.
and you'll see a lot of actors do this backstage. But a shakeout is simply shaking each limb on your on your body, in your body, on your body, of your body, whatever, shaking each limb.
Not
If you're
English. It's not an English podcast. We're good.
Yeah, exactly. If you're able to, so if you're seated, you kind of want to sit with your feet flat on the ground. And the shakeout is going to be, you're going to start with your right hand, and then you're going to shake it for a count of 8, and then you're going to go with your left hand for a count of 8, and then your right foot for a count of 8, and your left foot for a count of 8. You're just going to shake it out, and then you'll do the same thing again for a count of 4, then for a count of 2, and for a count of 1, and the momentum will slowly increase as we do it. And what you're going to do is you're going to actually count out loud as you do it. Okay. So let's go ahead and try that, and then I'll explain why we do all these things. But
Okay.
start with your right hand and count out loud: 1,
Two,
2,
three,
3,
four,
4,
five,
5,
six,
6,
seven,
7, 8.
eight,
1, 2, 3, 4,
five,
5,
six,
6,
seven,
7, 8. Right leg: 1,
one, two,
2,
three,
3,
four,
4,
five,
5, 6,
seven,
7, 8.
eight,
Left leg: 1,
two,
2,
three,
3,
four,
4, 5,
five,
6,
six, seven,
7, 8.
eight,
4. Right hand: 1,
one,
2,
two,
3, 4.
four, one,
1,
two,
2, 3,
three,
4.
one,
1, 2, 3, 4.
four,
1, 2, 3, 2. 1, 2,
two,
1, 2,
two,
1, 2, 1,
one,
2,
two,
1, 1,
one,
1,
one,
1.
one. Oh my God, I lost count of one of my stops. I don't know if you caught it.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah,
But
but it's okay. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's easy, but it's,
yeah, it's so easy. It's very straightforward,
I
and
feel like
it
my
is.
energy is pumped or like elevated for
Yeah,
sure.
your blood starts like your blood starts flowing literally. A lot of times people go, "Oh, shake out," and they just kind of like shake their whole body, which is great. But what's happening when you actually shake and count at the same time is that you're starting to establish that kind of mind-body connection,
Oh, I got
right?
that makes sense.
Every exercise, every warm-up exercise that you do, we want to make sure that it is specific and intentional. So you're not just kind of like randomly doing it. You're shaking out this right hand. And like sometimes I'll tell people, if you're feeling nervous, think about it as like you're flicking off that like nervous energy. One,
Oh, I
two,
like
three.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, your nerves.
shake it off, right? And so you do that, and you're starting to connect your mind and your body. And so even when we do breathing exercises, which by the way, deep breathing is the fastest way to calm down what's called the vagus nerve, which is, again, scientifically shown to be the best and fastest way to get out of that mode of fight or flight in your brain. It's like a couple of deep breaths. But if you count when you're inhaling, so sometimes what we do is we'll say inhale through your nose for a count of 4 and exhale through your mouth for a count of 6. So you're going to exhale longer than you inhale. 3 deep breaths like that can be the fastest way for you to get into a flow state.
Cool. And the mind body piece is really clever. Like that makes a lot of sense when you laid out that way, but I don't think I would have naturally just gone there.
Right. Yeah. So next time before you go into a call or meeting with your manager, look at each other. Quick shakeout. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just do that, and then you get in there. Now you're both synced up.
Yeah.
You're on the same page. That rhythm of counting together gets you that trust as well. It's a great, and there's so many exercises that we do specifically with pairs of people who are presenting together, who need to be able to bounce off of each other, right? I mean, how many meetings have you been in where there's a salesperson and an account manager, and the salesperson starts talking and he goes, and now so and so is going to talk about this, and then the account manager stands up and is like fumbling and is like, I don't know, I wasn't even listening to what they were saying. Like,
Yeah, or like someone that goes rogue. It's like I've been in meetings where I have a path and I'm taking the client down the path, and then my teammate grabs them and takes them down another lane. It's like, whoa, you messed up the path we were on. Like, and if you don't get alignment ahead of time, so
yeah.
that's huge.
Yeah, yeah, and it's usually the salesperson who messes it up because the account manager is like, "Wait, I have all the charts, I have all the results of our campaign."
Okay, let's do one more and then we can start to wrap it up.
Okay, great. Well, let's do remember when for that exact. I mean, I wasn't planning on doing remember when. I wasn't planning on doing anything. I had no idea what we were going to talk about, Sarah. This is great.
Well,
But
you were an improv guy, so I was like, I can do a little more loosey goosey with this one.
but with remember when is a kind of classic improv yes and exercise, right? So yes and is this foundational phrase of improv performance where you kind of accept the universe that is being offered to you by your scene partner, and you build on that universe. And so we like to do this exercise called Remember When, where two of us, Sarah, you and I, will recount an amazing trip that we both took together. And let's not make it Las Vegas because we were actually in Las Vegas last week, or was that last week? 2 weeks
Just last
ago?
week, yeah.
Just last week?
I know.
Was it 2 years ago? I have no idea. So we're going to pick a random location and we're going to talk about the strip. And the way we're going to do it is we're just going to go back and forth. You're going to kick us off, Sarah, and you're going to say, "Hey, remember when we went to," and you'll pick a random place, and then my job is to respond with yes and build on your idea, and then it'll come back to you, and we'll just kind of ping pong back and forth, and we'll just start every sentence with yes
Okay.
and be enthusiastic and excited about saying yes, and then we'll talk about the exercise itself. But
Okay.
go ahead.
I have so many I almost said fictional. I have so many real places that I've never been to before. So
Let's go to one of those places. Yeah.
remember when we went to Tokyo, Japan?
Yes, and I really wanted us to climb Mount Fuji.
Yes, and I told you that's not how I wanted to spend my vacation, but I would compromise and we would do a nice trail through the cherry blossoms.
Yes, and when we were walking through on that trail through the cherry blossoms, we saw that animal that we'd never seen before.
Yes, what was that animal? It kind of looked like a deer, I think.
Yes, and we slowly approached it, and it actually spoke to us in English.
Yes, and it welcomed us to Japan and then told us we had to try this restaurant.
Yes, and we went to the restaurant, and the restaurant was called Dear Japan, and they served veal. Oh God.
They served venison. It was so messed up. The poor deer was sending us to his own cannibal restaurant.
Yes, and we were so turned off by it, but the food was delicious.
Yes. And we swore we'd never tell anyone about eating venison as vegetarians, and now we just put it on the podcast.
Yes, and now PETA is out for us. Okay, great. So let's pause it there.
Okay, well, first I want to apologize. I should have just rolled with the Mount Fuji plan. I totally didn't follow the rules of improv, I feel like.
No, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Also, I'm not 100% sure that Mount Fuji is in Tokyo. It might be in Osaka. I don't know
Well,
Japanese geography very well.
still.
Yeah, it's in the country.
Yeah. And then the deer could talk. I didn't even think about talking animals. That's cool.
So I did that purposely because there was nothing in the rules that said it had to be real, right? We didn't even have to go to a real place. And so what I love about this exercise is that it forces you to do a few things. One, it forces you to let go of control of the narrative, which is a really important skill if you're in sales.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's something we all struggle with. I will speak for myself, but like, yeah, it's hard to feel like you're not in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And it forces you to deeply listen to what the person is saying, because you might have said in your head, okay, you're like, okay, we're going to the cherry blossom. And while I was talking, you might have been like, okay, what else can we do in Japan? But then I go animal, and you're like, oh God, there was an animal. Yeah, I guess, what was it? Was it a deer? Yes. And, and so now you have to force yourself to truly listen to what your scene partner is saying in order to be able to build on it. Whether you've never been to Japan, you said, right? Or you've never been to Tokyo. I've never been to Japan, but we were drawing on our memories of stories we have heard about Japan, drawing on our memories of like what it might be like to walk through a forest, whatever, right? So these images were being conjured up in our head. That's all coming from our medial prefrontal cortex. And so we're forcing ourselves to use that part of our brain. During the workday, we rarely are giving ourselves permission to do that. we are in the analytical part of our brain most of the workday because we need to make sure that the numbers and the things and we're sending all the right emails and we're doing all the right things. When we force ourselves, when we allow ourselves to draw on our memories and our experiences, that opens up that medial prefrontal cortex. The listening part is something that far too few people learn how to do effectively. We learned pretty early on, our tagline at Speechless used to be yourself and be heard, right? So how can you most effectively bring your authentic self into the conversations you're having, into the talks you're giving? We learned pretty early on, though, that we could teach people till we were blue in the face how to speak up and how to be heard. But if we didn't teach the people around them how to listen, it's falling on deaf ears,
Mhm.
almost literally, right? So, and then what happens is people go, oh, this person just talks a lot, complains a lot. I can't deal with it. You become the squeaky wheel,
Mhm.
right? If we teach people how to truly deeply listen to what folks are saying, it can change the dynamics of not just a sales conversation, but also a conversation with your colleagues. It can change the dynamics of how decisions are made in a company because everyone's voice feels heard. Even if I'm not saying that everyone has to do what everyone says, but actually truly hearing what they're saying, building on their ideas, or addressing those concerns in an effective way. And that this game does so many things at the same time, right? So if you're in a sales meeting, if you go in there and you ask those discovery questions but you don't care what the answer is, you are not truly yes-anding. But if you actually hear the answers and you say, okay, what are some of the biggest challenges you face, or like what are your biggest pain points, that generic question, and the client says something and you start building on that thing as opposed to just going to the next question, it completely changes the dynamic of the conversation.
Yeah.
The client feels heard. And time again, the clients have said that the salespeople that they trust and that become their trusted advisors are people who truly listen to them and hear them. And so you could go in there and say, listen, I know that you guys provide this, but my problem is this. And for a salesperson to say, great, I'm not even going to go into my deck because I want to help you solve that problem. That can build that connection in a much more effective way. And that's what an exercise like yes and or remember when allows you to do. Yes and has been a phrase that has been thrown around so much that it's now kind of used in a negative way. I've been in meetings where I say, what does yes and mean to you? And people say, it's a nice way to say no. And it's like, oh, well, that's a problem. I don't want that to be the case. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Reclaiming the yes and I mean, I can totally see. I appreciate that you talk so much about the brain and the science behind
Hmm.
it, because I think to me it's very straightforward and very clear, but I think that I'm a silly person, so it's a
Right.
little, I think it's maybe easier for me to accept some of those things. So I appreciate that you spent time on like going through the brain. The two different parts of our brain and pulling the more creative side in. I think
Yeah.
that's where like true innovation happens. So this is really giving us a path to crack open those doors to innovation too.
Yeah,
And
there's a great case study that Airbnb did called the 11-star experience, which I won't get too much into. I'll leave it as an exercise for the listener to follow up on. But they essentially used the yes and technique to figure out what their next product could be after kind of room rentals or the classic Airbnb. And the way they did it, they kind of sat around a table and said, what does a 5-star experience look like for us? Great. What is a 6-star? What's a 7-star? And then at some point, like in our story where we talked about a talking deer, at some point it got absurd, right? So their 25-star experience was like private jets will fly you to a starship that takes you to Mars and you spend a week on Mars and like all that fun stuff. But then they went back and they were like, what was that 11-star experience? Oh, the 11-star experience was you get to the house, it's clean, there's coffee, and there's a note from the host that says, I saw on your profile you enjoy surfing. Here's a map of all the local surf areas. And that's how they started to develop the idea of Airbnb experiences, right?
cool.
And so absolutely an important way to get to that innovative headspace while understanding, and this is something that we hear a lot from people, like this is all well and good in a workshop, but you can't say yes to everything in a workplace.
Hmm.
And we totally understand that. But I always say when you're brainstorming, if you can time box 5 or 10 minutes where you're just going to yes and each other, then say, okay, now let's try to solve this problem. You're going to find that you're going to get to a solution a lot faster because you are in that that innovative headspace, but also because someone might have said something in that yes and time where you're like, ooh, there's a little bit of a nugget there. We can build on that. So
That's so cool. Well, I just so appreciate you walking it through. You didn't disappoint. It was a fun and cool episode. And like this show's on YouTube, folks. So if you want to watch how to do the shakeout,
now you tell me we're on YouTube.
I know you can handle it. I just want to thank you so much. Truly, this was a really fun conversation. I had a lot of aha moments too about tying like the performance piece to sales, active listening, and why improv is relevant there, how it makes different pathways in our brains, how it makes us more open and authentic and present. Like I loved it. So I just want to thank you first and foremost. Before I ask you where people can find you, is there anything else you want to leave us with or share that we didn't cover yet?
I would say more just this idea of finding ways to get into a state of play. And I'm just reiterating something I said earlier in the episode, which is for us, that's our goal, right? How do we get people to understand, not only appreciate the impact of play on our brains, but also start to develop that habit of play? And the only way you do that, I mean, we're asking people to play, and you'd think that it would be a really easy ask, but most people are like, oh, okay, that seems uncomfortable, I don't want to do that. Can I just do the spreadsheet instead? So just finding different ways, and play means different things to different people, right? For some people it is literally playing video games. For others, it's playing those word games. We're starting to develop a digital platform that allows you to continue to practice and play these games and get into that, build a behavior, as it were, build a behavioral change that allows you to get into that state of play much faster. And when you do that, you find all of these other benefits that come with it.
Well, I'll just tell you my easiest way to get into play and on the camera. Have you ever seen these little guys?
Oh my God.
I
That
have
brings
little
me
hand puppets on.
Speaking of SNL, it's like the Kristen Wiig skit, right?
No, but it's so funny. And so I just have, I have like my little pen jar, and then I just have a little tiny hand. And when appropriate, I'll give someone a high five. But it's like a nice little reminder for me to be playful too, because if you think we can get pretty heads down on our work, and I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing that message. So
Absolutely.
where can people find you? And
Freestyle
freestyle.
Plus, freestyleplus.com. All the information about us is on there. We have links to all of our social media things and all of that fun stuff. But if there's any way that we can support, please reach out to us. And that can be anything from performances at sales kickoffs to actually running multi-week and multi-month training programs. Freestyleplus.com.
I love it. I have a couple leads I want to send you.
Great. Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Vivek.
Thanks, Sarah.